Now let me tell y'all a story. This ain't no ordinary story. This is not your run of the mill press conference moment. This is a truth bomb that shook the room, slapped arrogance across the face, and told the world, India ain't playing second fiddle to nobody anymore. Picture this, an international forum, cameras flashing, suits all lined up, the West sitting up straight like they own the floor, and there she is, this young, confident American girl, armed with facts she downloaded from biased search engines, sipping on the narrative she was raised to believe. She stood up chin high, thinking she was about to corner Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister. Like she was gonna catch him off guard. She thought she had it, but she forgot one thing. Jaishankar is built different. Now don't get it twisted. She wasn't being rude. She was polite, articulate, sharp, but the question, oh, it was loaded. It had the same tone the West has used for decades, that we know better than you tone. That how dare you not follow our values a tone. That why aren't you towing the Western line tone. She said something like, why is India buying oil from Russia when the West is imposing sanctions? Isn't that against global ethics? The room went silent. People leaned forward in their seats. Some smirked like they were finally gonna watch India squirm. Some reporters already started drafting their headlines. They were ready to twist his response, ready to call India selfish, ready to accuse India of betraying so-called universal values. But that's when it happened. The man didn't flinch, not even a blink. Dr. Jaishankar leaned into the mic, calm as a monk, sharp as a blade. And what came out of his mouth wasn't just a reply. It was a surgical strike of truth. He said, you do what's in your interest, we do what's in our interest, and trust me, we know how to look after our own people. Boom. That wasn't just a mic drop, that was an empire drop. He turned that question on its head so fast the air in the room changed. You could feel it, like thunder rumbling under silk. Because when he said that, he wasn't just talking to that girl. He was talking to an entire system. A system that pretends to be neutral but always takes sides. A system that preaches democracy while selling weapons. That punishes others for doing what it does every day. And in that moment, India spoke loud and clear. See, what the West forgets is that India ain't the same India from 1991. This ain't the nation that begged the IMF. This ain't the India that sat quiet at the table, nodding while the West played its global chessboard. This is a nation that built itself from the ground up, brick by brick, bite by bite, and bullet by bullet. You want to talk ethics? Let's talk about how countries who built their empires on colonization now turn around and lecture others about human rights. Let's talk about how nations that bomb countries into the Stone Age now claim the moral high ground. Let's talk about how their media spins every story where India dares to stand tall and frames it as defiance rather than independence. But Jaishankar wasn't having it. Not today, not ever, because that's the thing about him. He doesn't argue, he doesn't shout. He doesn't need to prove India's worth to anybody. He just speaks facts, cold, clean, undeniable, and when the world tries to throw shade, he simply lights the whole room up with truth. He said, if Europe is buying gas from Russia, why is it only a problem when India does it? You could hear spines snapping. That was the moment the script flipped. That was the moment the narrative got rewritten. Because he wasn't just calling out hypocrisy. He was doing it with grace, with clarity, and with the kind of confidence that only comes when you know who you are. See, India has spent decades listening to lectures on freedom, from nations that toppled elected governments, lectures on peace from countries with trillion-dollar defense budgets, lectures on economy from places drowning in debt and printing dollars like monopoly money. But now it's India's turn to speak, And that moment when Jaishankar calmly told that young lady the truth, he wasn't attacking her, he was freeing her. He was giving her a front row seat to the rise of a new world. One that's not east or west, one that's not colonial or subservient, a world where India decides its own future. That room didn't clap, it sat stunned, because they'd never seen India stand this tall before. But that wasn't the first time Jaishankar did it. Oh no, this man's been on a streak, whether it's telling the UK that colonial reparations are overdue or reminding the US that India doesn't need approval to defend its borders, or telling Canada to handle its own extremists before pointing fingers. He's been serving truth on a silver platter and making sure the world gets the message. India is done playing nice. Now, don't get me wrong, being polite is part of Indian culture. Respect is embedded in the DNA, but there comes a point when silence gets mistaken for weakness, and that's when you need a voice like Jaishankar. Someone who isn't just diplomatic, but deadly accurate with his words. Someone who knows every chess piece on the board and moves like a grandmaster. Someone who doesn't ask for permission to protect his people. You see, the West has always operated on control through media, through narratives, through money, through power, and they had their time, but times have changed. India's building its own satellites, its own AI, its own fighter jets. India's negotiating trade deals that don't need dollars. India's standing toe-to-toe with China, face with the West, and saying, we'll be friends, but we won't be puppets. That young American girl. She walked in thinking she had the upper hand. She left with an education, not from a textbook, but from a living embodiment of Indian diplomacy. And what's even more beautiful, Jaishankar didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make it personal, because truth doesn't need decoration. Truth stands on its own. The world is not ready for a confident India. An India that no longer needs validation. An India that doesn't break under pressure but builds under it. An India that still holds ancient wisdom and now wears modern armor. Because let's be real, when the world had vaccines, it hoarded them. When India had vaccines, it shipped them to 150 plus countries. When the world faced war, they sold arms. When India faced war, it chose defense, not destruction. When others push propaganda, India pushes progress. That's why when Jaishankar speaks, the world listens, not because of loudness, but because of clarity. And what's ironic is this: they keep underestimating him. They think he's just a foreign minister. But he's a mirror, and every time he responds, he makes the world look at itself. And it don't always like what it sees. That's power. That's real diplomacy. That's India's new voice. This ain't the era of being non-aligned, just to stay neutral. This is the era of being aligned with your own interests, your own growth, your own vision. So when the next person stands up and asks India, why are you doing this? They better be ready for the answer. Because India's done apologizing for surviving, done explaining for succeeding, done defending for rising. That moment with the American girl wasn't about a clapback. It was about claiming space. It was about sending a message, not with anger, but with awareness. Not with aggression, but with assertion. And if you're out there wondering what lesson to take from this, it's simple. Don't ever let someone else write your story. Don't let someone else define your ethics. Don't let someone sit across from you, question your decisions, and make you forget the battles you've already fought to stand tall. Because there will always be people who don't like your confidence, who don't like that you think differently, who want you to follow their path while ignoring your own. But just like Jaishankar, when the spotlight hits you, don't blink, don't back down. Just stand firm, breathe deep, and let the truth speak louder than fear. Because the world don't respect the loudest voice, it respects the clearest one. And right now, that voice is speaking Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, Telugu, Marathi, and English, all wrapped in one flag. That voice is rising from Delhi, from Bengaluru, from Chennai, from Kashmir, from the Northeast, from every corner that once felt ignored. That voice is telling the world India has arrived, and not quietly. Not secretly, but powerfully, proudly, and permanently. One composed reply reminded the world, India answers to its people, not foreign expectations. And that's a sentence rooted not just in a moment of diplomatic fire, but in decades of transformation, resilience, and rising pride. For too long, global narratives have tried to shape India's identity. Whether through patronizing policy, prescriptions, or subtle pressure cloaked in the name of global responsibility. The West often approached India as if it were a student being graded, not a sovereign nation making sovereign choices. But the world has changed, India has changed, and when Dr. S. Jaishankar spoke that composed, sharp reply, it was more than an answer. It was a declaration of independence from the outdated template of Western approval. You see, there's a long history behind that moment. From the days of colonial rule where India's every move was dictated by foreign masters to the post-independence era of cautious diplomacy, India spent decades trying to find its feet in a world dominated by narratives it didn't write. The world told India when to speak, how to speak, and more importantly, what not to say. It was expected to be polite, deferential, and always in tune with what the so-called developed nations deemed acceptable. Even when India acted in its national interest, it had to explain, justify, or defend those actions to global powers whose own histories were drenched in double standards. But something shifted, and that shift wasn't just economic, military, or technological. It was psychological. It was cultural, it was emotional. 1 billion people began to believe that India didn't need to be told how to behave, that it had the wisdom, the vision, and the right to walk its own path. This self-assurance slowly began reflecting in its leadership, especially in global forum. No longer was India walking into rooms seeking a seat at the table. It was walking in knowing that without its voice, the table was incomplete. And that's why when the American student asked Jaishankar a loaded question, framed innocently but rooted in that old, condescending tone, the reply was not angry, not aggressive, but composed, controlled, and cutting. Because the goal wasn't to insult her, it was to correct the entire mindset she unknowingly represented. It was a moment of educating not just a student, but a generation raised on Western exceptionalism. What Jaishankar did in that reply was dismantle the assumption that India owed anyone an explanation for making decisions that benefit its own citizens. He reminded the room and the world watching that every Indian decision, be it on trade, diplomacy, defense, or energy, is filtered through one question: is this good for the Indian people? That's the new doctrine. Not whether it pleases foreign analysts, not whether it earns praise from think tanks in Washington or Brussels, but whether it uplifts the Indian farmer, empowers the Indian woman, protects the Indian border, and secures the Indian economy. And that's revolutionary because for years India was seen as a country that needed help, aid, guidance, approval, but today India is offering digital infrastructure models to the world. It's exporting vaccines, not importing them. It's building its own aircraft carriers, launching interplanetary missions, and setting global standards in fintech. So when a foreign voice questions Indian policy, especially with the assumption that it must align with the West's agenda, it's not just naive, it's outdated. Jaishankar's reply encapsulated that change. It was not defensive. He didn't explain away India's choices like some student being interrogated. He stated with full clarity that India will always choose what benefits its people. Whether it's purchasing oil from Russia to ensure affordable fuel for Indian citizens, or refusing to take sides in conflicts that don't serve national interests, or speaking firmly against Western hypocrisy, every decision is based on one principle: sovereignty with accountability to the Indian public, not foreign powers, and that's what rattles the traditional world order. Because when a nation like India speaks with that kind of conviction, it disrupts the entire post-colonial power dynamic. The West isn't used to being challenged by a country they once tried to mold. They aren't used to being told, politely but firmly, you don't get to decide our values. They aren't used to seeing a rising power that doesn't beg for alliances but builds partnerships on equal terms. It's unsettling to them, not because India is being hostile, but because India is being independent. The composed nature of Jaishankar's statement is key. He didn't use emotional rhetoric. He didn't raise his voice. He used poise as his weapon, precision as his power, and in doing so, he demonstrated a kind of strength that doesn't need volume. It relies on vision. A vision where India no longer needs to explain itself, because its actions speak louder than the assumptions made about it. And let's be clear, India is not rejecting the world. It's engaging with it, but on its own terms. It's choosing multi-alignment instead of blind loyalty. It's talking to Russia, trading with the U.S., investing in Africa, and collaborating in the Indo-Pacific, all at the same time. That flexibility, that confidence to say yes or no, based on its own logic, not borrowed ideologies, is what defines this new India. And that's what Jaishankar expressed in a single composed statement. He also exposed a deeper flaw in global perception, that somehow Western choices are inherently moral and any deviation is suspect. But India has learned through experience that morality is often used as a tool of control. Countries that claim to defend freedom have armed dictators. Those that claim to love peace have fueled endless wars. So India's morality is not performative. It's rooted in its civilizational ethos. It believes in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, but it also knows that charity begins at home. You don't sacrifice your citizens for applause from abroad. And when that young woman posed her question, she probably didn't expect a lesson in geopolitical self-respect. But that's what she got, because in that one moment, the External Affairs Minister of India acted not just as a statesman, but as a symbol of a billion people who are tired of being talked down to. A billion people who are saying, through him we know what we're doing, and we're doing it for ourselves. That's a message the world better get used to, because the India of today won't be judged by foreign media. It won't be swayed by Twitter outrage or diplomatic pressure. It is being governed by its own needs, its own priorities. Whether it's dealing with China on the border, developing homegrown defense systems, or refusing to pick sides in power games between empires, India's policy compass is now fixed on one point: national interest guided by domestic responsibility. And yes, this might make some people uncomfortable, because the West is used to allies that obey, but India doesn't do obedience anymore. It does dialogue, it does decisions, and it does dignity. That's what the world witnessed in that brief exchange. And it wasn't just about foreign policy. That reply reflected something much deeper: an Indian civilizational confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you don't need anyone's approval to exist with pride. The kind that comes from realizing that the world is not a classroom where some nations are teachers and others are students. We are all peers, and India, with its culture, its intellect, and its rising power, is stepping up to lead, not to follow. That's why the composed reply echoed far beyond that room. It traveled through headlines, it stirred online debates, but more importantly, it reached the hearts of Indians everywhere who have, for years, watched their country be underestimated. It was a moment of validation, not from the world, but from within. It was a reminder that leadership isn't always about loudness. It's about clarity of conviction. Because when you answer to your people, you don't flinch under global pressure. You don't buckle when criticized. You don't compromise your sovereignty. You look the world in the eye and say, "We see you, but we also see ourselves." That is the foundation of real power, not borrowed prestige. Not inherited alliances, but self-determined citizen-focused governance. So when Jaishankar replied with such composure, he wasn't just speaking for a government. He was speaking for every Indian who wakes up wanting a better life. For every voter whose trust built this democracy. For every voice that was once ignored but now echoes in policymaking halls. And he did it with grace, because grace is stronger than aggression. And truth, when spoken without fear, becomes the most powerful weapon in diplomacy.